I'm incredibly excited to be here today with a very special guest whose name is Vivek Uppal, the creative mind behind the innovative AI tool Transcribe, on which I did a video a few days back. And it is one of the most popular videos for this week. So I'll drop the link to it in video's description too, this one. So make sure you watch it. Vivek, it's a pleasure really to have you with us today. Your journey in the field of technology, and especially AI, has been quite remarkable, what I have seen from LinkedIn and your GitHub repo. And I'm sure everyone here in the audience is as eager as I am to dive into your experience, insights, and the actual story behind this transcribe. But before we get into it, and the nuts and bolts of what exactly you have done there, let's start with something a bit more personal. Could you please share a bit about your background, your early life, and what sparked your passion for technology and AI?
Thank you. Thank you, Fahad. First of all, let me take this opportunity to actually say thank you for taking the time for doing this. We've known each other for a small amount of time, but over that period of time, I think we have collaborated on a few things, and it has really been a pleasure to collaborate with you. And I've really enjoyed all our interactions. And you taking the time to make some of the videos for Transcribe and also actually doing this together. Really happy about that. And, very grateful that you're doing this together. We both are in very different parts of the world.
True.
So the time zones and everything kind of at times can be an impediment to us collaborating. But the fact that both of us are here together today doing this, that makes me really happy. So thank you. Uh,
Vivek.
Coming back to your question about a little bit of my background and my role in the technology world or my background in the technology world as well. Like personally, I have actually traveled the globe a fair amount, as we've talked a little bit earlier also, originally from India, and my roots are actually from Pakistan. One of my parents were actually born in Pakistan, traveled to India at the time of partition, and then after that, uh, as life would have it, I am here in Boston, Massachusetts, and enjoying my time and stay in the technology community as well. I started out like my experience, a lot of it is in the security industry. I spent a fair bit of time in the cybersecurity industry building tools for cybersecurity. A fair amount of that experience was with a company called Carbon Black, originally Bit9, then moved on to then changed names to Carbon Black. And that was based in the Boston area, and one of the success stories of the area in the last couple of years. So I started out in the technology industry as fairly focused on the cybersecurity industry. But me being me, I'm actually a very curious mind, and I like to learn a lot of technologies and keep up with what's going on in the technology world. So I got introduced to data science and machine learning and AI as part of a tech startup, a fintech startup called MacroX Studio. This is a startup that's actually done by one of my high school friends, Apoor. You can see that on my LinkedIn profile as well. And it got started there. I During the early days of that startup, I helped them set up like a data science platform, a SaaS native data science platform, and the platform today also is active, and it's learning hundreds of pipelines, all of them in the cloud, collecting data from over 300 data sources. So just putting a little bit of plug here for Apoor, just because he introduced me to the field and actually gave me the opportunity to be able to have hands-on experience in the field itself, right? From there on, like coming on to generative AI, it's mostly me being curious and being wanting to keep myself up to date with the trends in the technology. And I've always liked to be hands-on. Over a period of time, the amount of time that I can spend hands-on has kind of reduced, but Transcribe gave me an opportunity to go back a little bit to my roots and be hands-on keyboards and do some coding. So that's a little bit about me and how I ended up with Transcribe.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's very remarkable, as I said earlier, and thanks for sharing that. So coming back to this transcribe thing later, but before I cannot resist but to ask about this cybersecurity thing. Any specific tool you would like to mention where you have worked in the past?
I used to work a lot of my career in the cybersecurity was I used to work on a product called Carbon Black Defense, or it went through several iterations of its name. So it was Carbon Black Defense. That was the primary product that I worked on in my latest incarnation. And before that, it used to be App Control, Carbon Black App
Okay.
Control, that we used to work on. And they were both geared towards securing the desktops, laptops, or the VMs from any cybersecurity attacks.
Right.
The
Got it.
products could be used both from a protection perspective and also from a response perspective. So after, if you had been actually been breached, what do you do to respond and remediate, right? And a lot of my colleagues have been in the cybersecurity world, still in touch with them, of course, yes.
Awesome. Okay. Got it. Thanks. So now, our main forte of today, the transcribe. What was the real inspiration behind creating transcribe? Very, very curious and keen to know that. And was there a specific problem or gap you were aiming to address there?
Yes. The Transcribe project started out as a way for me to educate myself. I wanted to educate myself in the cybersecurity field, and hence it started out like that, right? Uh, Also, as I said, I like to be hands-on and like to do it. So I thought the best way to do it is the best way to get my hands into the generative AI field is by actually reading about the field and then doing something on your own, not just reading but
Yeah.
actually attempting to do something like you do a lot of in your videos as well, like you actually go through the steps and educate all your viewers about how to go about doing this, right? That's how it started. And I've always been interested in speech to text, so that's what I picked up. And as you know, my GitHub repo is based upon another GitHub repo. So I liked that project to begin with and started. And one of why did I pick this up? Primarily because I'm very sensitive to data privacy and security aspects of it. So a lot of it, I want to do it on my own machine itself, like as little of the data that we need to send to the cloud, the better I feel about it.
Yeah.
Because as you know, like a lot of data, a lot of metrics are actually being collected on every individual today. So that's how it started. Be in the generative AI field. Speech to text is something I've always been interested in. Keep the data local as much as possible. And I started out with experimenting with the tool. And as I got more and more into it, I realized that from a usability perspective, there were a whole lot of things that we could potentially do to improve it, right?
Yeah.
I
Makes
started
sense.
out there, right? I started out there. The gaps from my perspective was not the speech to text aspect of it, but really the usability aspects of the tool itself, right? And that would reflect in some of the work that I have done as well on Transcribe.
Got it. So, was there any specific hurdle or challenge you faced during this project, which you would like to mention?
Oh, sure, right. On a personal side, right? We have all of us have very busy lives, so pursuing this kind of like personal passion, like in the very early days, making time for pursuing a personal passion was one of the biggest challenges. But as I read more about it and I started to get into it, I think it became very clear that I wanted to make time for it, right? Like
Yeah.
from my perspective, like getting started or taking the first steps to actually begin was the biggest hurdle for me. That was on the personal side. On the technical side of things, there's like as you know, like you publish so many videos on generative AI, there's so much noise in the field itself. Like there is a lot of noise,
Yeah.
and getting kind of like uh, getting the signal out of the noise can be hard, right?
Yeah.
Like what do you focus on? Like in the generative AI, there is so much, the field is moving fast and there is so much going on. So what is it that you would actually want to focus on, right? Like you can potentially do so much. So uh, reading things and then seeing what you naturally incline or gravitate towards was kind of one of the biggest challenges for me. And I naturally gravitated towards speech to text and being able to do things on my machine itself. And I actually found that a lot of times uh, it was hard to remember everything that you have in a conversation, but actually being able to go back and view the conversation later on is actually really, really helpful, right?
Makes
You
sense.
you
Yeah.
you will actually see, like I'm based on ecout, but uh, with transcribe, I one of the enhancements that I made was to record the complete from beginning to end. It's not just like the last 10
Yeah.
sentences that we talk, but because for me, being able to see the whole conversation, go back to it, because it refreshes your memory. And when you read something or go back through a thought process the second time, it reinforces what you were doing and it helps you understand things much better, right? So it was not like one shot, just
Yeah.
now I want to answer something and do it was not that, but it was more of being able to see some record something, read through it, and then being able to summarize it in a meaningful fashion. That's where the growth, like the personal growth, takes place, right?
Got it. Yeah.
So a little bit of how I got into it and some of the challenges of like I let myself naturally gravitate towards an area, and this is where we are.
And you have done a wonderful job because I have been playing around with it on CPU and GPU, and it's fantastic. And I would highly recommend everyone again to go test it out. So, is there any upcoming feature or improvement which users can look forward to in the coming days or months in Transcribe?
Thank you for asking that. I'm very focused on the usability side of things. So some of the things I really some of the feedback I've gotten from the users, consistent users of the application is, first is like the install is a little hard, right? Like we need to do all the Python dev environment setup and all of that. So for developers, it's easy, but for non-developer you people, it's actually fairly involved for them to have the whole setup to be able to run that, right? Uh, we attempted we have like a Python independent package also, which you can run as an exe and all that, but still it's fairly big and it's a little bit cumbersome, right? Like, so that's one of the things that we will look at in the coming days. Another consistent feedback that I've gotten is about the user interface, and have some of like more responsive technologies for the user interface, like a browser-based UI, which is something that we are actively working on. And I hope in the next couple of weeks we would have a browser-based interface for the exact same tool be available for us. So hoping to do that sometime soon. And uh, since I want to do a lot of it local as much as possible, so continuing to improve the speed of transcription so that it's more and more real time is something that's very dear to me, and I intend to focus and work on that as well. Right.
Awesome. Okay. That I think that will be wonderful. Already I think the speed is good, but more improvement, that would be fabulous. And have you been collaborating with other industry experts or AI experts or companies in developing this transcribe or any commercialization of this?
Um, I have a small set of users who are very consistent users of this. So, and they have been a fairly good feedback or sounding board mechanism for him in terms of like big names in the tech industry or some high like marquee collaborations. We would love to, but at the moment, I think we're looking for some marquee collaborative names
Right.
that could help us, right? Like, as you know, we actually haven't spent much time in the marketing side of things. Outside of the GitHub repo, there's not much which talks about it. uh, Once I am at a point where I believe like this is actually some of the basic feedback that we have gotten from the consistent users of the application is actually taken care of, then we would start to focus on reaching broader out, right? Like, I feel like if the regular moms and pops who I intend should be able to use it, if they are not able to use it by themselves thus far, we're not really in a position where you can bring, like, experts, like really big marquee names who so that's where we are.
Got it. Yeah.
And
Makes sense. You already have touched upon this point, but I want to ask it again in another words. Maybe you could elaborate further on it because I believe that is one of the most important area of AI, security and privacy. So, in your opinion, in developing AI tools like Transcribe, how do you balance innovation with ethical considerations, especially in terms of privacy and data security?
that's a very good question. That's an extremely good question. And there's always a balance between innovation and ethics. And I think the way I personally go about doing it is ensuring that I'm consistently listening to feedback that I get from the users, right? Because uh, users from different walks of life are actually using. We can create rules, but I feel like any new innovation that comes in the industry, it can always be misused, and it has always been true,
Yeah,
right? Based on the different perspectives that people come from, for a data scientist, more and more data is always good. For an individual consumer, they might not want to share all that data. So based on the perspective, uh, based on a personal perspective, it could be very different what you like versus what you may not like, right? So I'm very, very open and collaborative on feedback from users and what they would or would not want to have this tool collect or not collect. And
yeah,
that reflects the focus on complete offline transcription as well, right? Because if you're doing online transcription, all of that data is going to by default to the cloud, right?
yeah,
And that's why that is actually reflected in some of the choices we made for transcribe as well. Like, by default, when you start up the application in its default settings, it does not send anything to the cloud. Anything that has to be sent to the cloud is an explicit action by the user. For example,
yeah,
even getting responses from LLM sends data to the cloud. So it sends data to a third party provider. And I'm sure they have lots of ethics and governance around how that data is used. But ultimately, it is something that the user should decide how much of that data can decide or can be shared with a third party provider. So
got it.
uh, to summarize it, I'm really, really attentive to user feedback,
Yeah,
and they help me decide where you lay the boundary between innovation and ethics.
got it. So I think we have talked enough on Transcribe, but beyond Transcribe, I'm sure you have a life. So what exactly you do in your spare time? Any hobbies? Any fun things you do?
Um, Thank
Don't say
you.
cricket. I
Yes.
know that cricket is a passion with it. Anything else?
No, that's very true. Cricket is definitely a passion for anyone from the subcontinent. It's
Yeah.
like you have to follow cricket. And with the World Cup, it just kind of like finished.
Yeah.
Australia, India being
Sorry
in the
about that. Yeah.
finals.
Yeah.
That was like the World Cup was very enjoyable for sure.
True. Yeah.
On the personal side of things, I'm consider myself fairly athletic. I kind of like work out on a regular basis. That's something I actually enjoy. I play a fair amount of sports. Right now, I'm not coaching, but I've been a soccer coach for a very long time, for 5 to 6 years. I've taught soccer to kids as my son was growing up. I taught soccer to him, so I've really enjoyed that. And Around the house, usually I like to do things by myself. So if there is stuff, there's always stuff around the house.
Correct. Yeah.
I enjoy doing that as well. I do not mind that. Although everyone in the house may not feel the same, they might think it takes me a very long time to get to something, but I do in, try to spend some time around the house as well. Just
With
uh,
the tools. Okay,
work
that's nice.
right, working on things. So yeah, personal life, like travel is also something I have enjoyed, although in the last couple of years, travels has been a little bit limited for us. Before that, we used to travel a fair amount with the family, but the last 3, 4 years has been a little bit, I would say, muted from a travel perspective. But I'm sure as we
It
go
will.
along, continue forward, things will open up and things will be much better from a travel perspective as well. So
So
that's
what's been your most favorite destination so far?
from a travel perspective. Let's see. I think one of the places I enjoyed the most was we visited Nova Scotia in Canada,
Yeah.
and it's fairly pristine. Like there are a fair amount of tourists, and there is some level of commercialization. But we, as a family, we really enjoyed our trip to Nova Scotia because purely because you felt like you were in the lap of nature, right? Like so much of the experience was so pristine, and sitting on the beach or doing a trek, uh, or it's a little bit on the inland. So Nova Scotia is kind of like it's a lot of it is around the sea, and they have a lot of natural wonders as well. For example, there is something called like a chocolate river, where when the tide comes up, the river kind of like flows the other direction up to, I think it was like 15 or 16 miles inland. The seawater comes in,
Wow.
and the river kind of like below the surface, the river is flowing into the sea, but at the surface, the sea is flowing into the river. And this happens twice every day, which never lets the sediment kind of like settle down. So the whole river is kind of like chocolate colored, right? It was amazing. It was just viewing
Okay.
the phenomena itself was amazing, but that was really, really something we enjoyed. It was a few years ago, but definitely one of my favorite memories. And traveling to the Caribbean is always fun. So it's
I know.
it's like
Okay.
a fallback. The If winter is around the corner, you think of traveling to the Caribbean, go get some sun, and that kind of like
Yeah.
charges you up for sure.
Or to Australia, where I am right now. I mean, whenever it's winter for you, it's summer for us.
uh, it is actually, Australia is definitely one of the places we want to do, especially the Great Coral Reef. That is
Yeah.
something we
Very
want
deep. Yeah.
to, the Barrier Reef, we want to enjoy. Uh, it's just the travel is a little bit longer, but it is definitely going to happen in the next, I would say, in the next 2 to 3 years. It's something that's absolutely going to happen.
Okay, that's good. Then we are waiting for you. But Vivek,
Absolutely.
thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I think we are already over time, but I could go on the whole day, but just to keep the audience time in perspective, any final message you want to give anyone who wants to learn AI, especially generative AI?
For the young developers for generative AI, I would say, from experience, one of the things that I've liked is please read. There's a lot happening in the field. Please read, stay up to date with the technologies and the improvements that we are making, and looking at Fahad's blog, or looking at viewing all the videos that Fahad comes up, because one of the things that I really like about you, Fahad, is how you consistently read and keep yourself up to date and actually share it with the community.
Thank
So
you.
I find it like a really good way to be able to keep a pulse on the generative AI field by watching your videos and reading your blog. So I would really encourage our all our viewers to actually do that. And the other thing I would say to young professionals is whatever you pick up, please finish. I see a lot of youngsters, they kind of like jump from one thing to another. And it's very enthralling to kind of like jump into something new and pick up
Yeah.
something new. but you actually have to finish something to be able to reap the benefits of being able to do it. So those are the two things I would say. Go to Fahad's blog, stay up to date with generative AI things, and please finish what you start, because that's how you actually make progress.
Great advice, especially about the focus and sustaining it. Thank you so much, Vivek. Highly appreciate your time today and hope everyone enjoyed. And if you like the content, please subscribe to the channel and I will drop the link to transcribe in video's description. Please go and try it out. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Fahad. Have a great day.
You too.